Night has fallen. This is when the outer world quiets down and your inner world is permitted to emerge. We've prepared a long, gentle essay like a soft lullaby for the thoughts of your day, gradually guiding you towards sleep. Imagine standing at the edge of a sleeping forest just before dawn. Mist clings to the earth like forgotten dreams. The air tastes of pine and damp soil cool against your skin. Your breath makes small clouds in the cold. Somewhere distant, an owl gives its final call before surrendering the night. You are the only witness to this transition, this liminal moment between darkness and light. In this threshold, space something shifts. The world around you holds its breath. The trees stand silent as sentinels, their bark rough and ancient beneath your fingertips. If you were to reach out and touch them, the ground beneath your feet feels both solid and temporary, as if you're standing at the border of two countries, the land of waking and the territory of dreams. Moisture clings to your clothes, dampens your hair. Each breath you take fills your lungs with the scent of earth and decay and new growth all mingled together, the smell of transformation itself. You sense it in your chest, that subtle pull, like a thread, connecting you to something you've forgotten. Something that has been calling your name in a language you once knew, but were taught to ignore. This feeling embodies the essence of what Carl Jung called the soul's return. It is at once peaceful and unsettling, familiar and strange. It resembles a threshold between who you think you are during the day and who you truly become when no one is watching. The contemporary world has taught us to fear this transition. We fill the silence with screens, with noise, with endless doing. We turn on lights to banish darkness, play music, to avoid the quiet scroll endlessly to escape ourselves. But Jung saw night differently. He understood that sleep is not merely the body's rest, but the soul's ritual of return. In his Red Book, Jung wrote of conversations with his unconscious that happened primarily at night, when the ego's defenses softened and deeper voices could speak. He recognized that when consciousness temporarily sleeps, the soul is finally allowed to breathe. This is what we've lost in the modern age of sleep optimization and productivity metrics. We treat sleep as a problem to solve, rather than a sacred doorway. We measure it, track it, try to hack it. But Jung would say we're missing the point entirely. Sleep is not a function to optimize. It is a spiritual practice, a nightly death and rebirth, where the conscious mind dissolves, so the unconscious can do its healing work. Throughout history, night has been recognized as sacred time. The ancient Greeks believed dreams came from the gods. Medieval monks practiced contemplatio, sitting in darkness to listen for divine whispers. Indigenous cultures worldwide performed dream work rituals, understanding that the night world held wisdom the day world could not touch. Even modern neuroscience, with all its sophisticated equipment, has discovered what mystics always knew. During sleep, the brain undergoes profound transformation, clearing toxins, consolidating memory, integrating emotional experience. This brings us to why you are here. Why psychology for sleep has become not just relevant, but necessary. You lie down each night, body exhausted, yet your mind races. You close your eyes, but behind your eyelids 1,000 thoughts flicker like restless birds. Work concerns relationship dynamics, future anxieties, past regrets, they circle endlessly, refusing to land. The harder you try to sleep, the more awake you become. The more you seek peace, the more agitated you feel. Jung would recognize this immediately. You are not suffering from insomnia. You are experiencing soul fragmentation. During the day you perform, you wear the persona, the social mask that says, I'm fine, I'm capable, I'm in control. You suppress the shadow, those parts of yourself deemed unacceptable. You ignore the inner child still waiting to be held. You split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. Then wonder why you cannot rest. Because rest requires wholeness. Sleep demands that all of you shadow and light child and adult masculine and feminine come together in the dark. When you resist parts of yourself during the day, they knock louder at night. When you deny emotions, they return as anxiety. When you suppress authenticity, it manifests as restlessness. The unconscious will not be ignored. It will speak one way or another. That is why we have created this space, this offering of psychology for sleep that honors both the science and the soul. Over the next 2 hours, we will journey through the depths of Jungian thought, exploring how the psyche organizes itself, how archetypes awaken in dreams, how the masculine and feminine within seek integration, and how meaningful coincidence points toward a universe more alive than we imagine. But this is not a lecture to study. It is a descent to experience. We will move slowly like divers, going deep, allowing pressure to equalize at each level. From the dissolution of ego and persona, down into the shadowy territories where rejected parts wait through the archetypal realms, where ancient patterns stir into the scientific understanding of how sleep heals, and finally to the confrontation with your own resistance and the promise of wholeness beyond it. You do not need to understand everything. In fact, the moment you stop trying to grasp intellectually and simply allow the words to wash over you, that is when the real work begins. Jung's psychology is not meant to be merely understood. It is meant to be lived, felt integrated into the marrow of your being. So, settle in. Let your body sink into the surface beneath you. Feel the weight of your head, your shoulders, your limbs. Notice your breath, how it comes and goes without your effort, like waves returning to shore. The conscious mind that has worked so hard today, that has judged and planned and worried, can finally rest. The night is calling you home, not to unconsciousness, but to a deeper consciousness, where the soul remembers itself, where psychology for sleep becomes not entertainment, but transformation, where you discover that the peace you seek is not something to achieve, but something to allow, like dawn arriving, whether you watch for it or not. Let the journey begin. When Jung spoke of night, he was not speaking meteorologically. He was describing a psychological state, a quality of awareness that arises when the outer world's demands recede and the inner world can finally emerge. Night, in the Jungian sense, is not defined by the position of the sun, but by the dissolution of the ego's dominance. During daylight hours, consciousness operates in what Jung called directed thinking, rational, linear, goal-oriented. We use language to categorize experience logic to solve problems, willpower to push toward outcomes. This is the realm of the ego, that organizing principle of consciousness, which says, I think, therefore, I am. The ego is necessary. It helps us navigate the external world, maintain boundaries, pursue goals. but it is not the whole of who we are. Night consciousness operates differently. Here, Jung identified what he termed fantasy thinking, associative, symbolic, image-based. Dreams do not follow logic. They speak in metaphor, paradox emotion. A house becomes your mother. A stranger carries your father's eyes. You fly without wings, drown without water, die without ending. This is not chaos. It is a different kind of order, one that the ego cannot control. We can distinguish this further through three framings. Physically, night is when we remove ourselves from stimulation. Light's dim noise softens, activity ceases. Our bodies enter a parasympathetic state, the rest and digest mode that allows healing to occur. Temporally, night represents a boundary, the transition between days, a liminal space where one identity ends and another can emerge. Psychologically, night is when the persona dissolves, when we no longer need to be the capable professional, the devoted parent, the strong friend. We can finally just be. Ancient wisdom recognized this. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus wrote, "The waking have one common world, but the sleeping turn aside, each into a world of his own." He understood that sleep was not a lesser state, but an alternate reality, equally valid, perhaps more honest. In sleep, we cannot lie. The unconscious reveals what the conscious mind hides. Medieval Christian monks practiced what they called the night office, waking at midnight to pray in darkness. They understood that the soul speaks most clearly when the world is quiet. Saint John of the Cross wrote of the dark night of the soul, not as depression, but as a necessary stage of spiritual transformation, where all external supports fall away and only faith in the invisible remains. This is precisely what happens in healthy sleep. We release our grip on the known and trust the unknown to hold us. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, this wisdom began to fade. Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am," privileging rational consciousness above all else. The Enlightenment sought to illuminate everything, to banish shadows through reason's light. Sleep became merely biological necessity, rather than spiritual opportunity. We began to see night as the absence of day, rather than its complement. The Romantic era pushed back. Poets like Novalis celebrated night as the realm of mystery and depth. We are near awakening when we dream that we dream. Novalis wrote, intuiting what Jung would later articulate systematically, that consciousness can observe its own unconscious processes, creating a third position beyond ego and shadow. Artists and writers deliberately explored altered states, seeking the creative wellspring that logic alone could not access. Entering more modern times, Freud began the scientific study of dreams, but made a critical error from Jung's perspective. Freud saw dreams as wish fulfillment, as distortions that needed to be decoded. Jung saw them as direct communications from the psyche already speaking clearly, if only we learn the language. For Jung, the unconscious was not merely a repository of repressed desires, but a creative force, an intelligence that could guide the individual toward wholeness. And today, in our contemporary moment, we face a crisis. We sleep less than any generation in human history. We consume sleeping pills at epidemic rates. We treat sleep deprivation as a badge of honor, proof of our importance and dedication. We have entire industries built around optimizing sleep, as if the soul's ritual could be reduced to an algorithm. This is what happens when we forget that night is sacred. Yet underneath this forgetting the old wisdom persists. You feel it when you finally close the laptop and sit in darkness. When you turn off the TV and notice the silence pressing in. When you lie down and suddenly remember something you'd forgotten. Not a fact, but a feeling. A sense of yourself that the day's performance obscured. That is the threshold opening. That is psychology for sleep beginning its work. Throughout the day, you operate through two primary structures, the ego and the persona. The ego is your sense of I, the organizing principle that creates continuity, makes decisions, says, this is me, and that is not me. It is necessary for functioning in the world. Without ego, you could not maintain identity, pursue goals, or distinguish yourself from others. But the ego is not the self. It is merely the self's representative in conscious awareness, like an ambassador sent to negotiate with external reality. The problem arises when we mistake the ambassador for the entire nation, when we believe the ego is all we are. The persona is even more surface level. Jung borrowed this term from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in Greek theater. The persona is the social role we perform, the face we show the world. At work, you wear the professional persona, competent, reliable, composed. With friends, perhaps the entertaining persona, funny, easygoing, supportive. With family, the dutiful persona, responsible, caring, available. These are not lies exactly. They are partial truths, fragments of a larger whole. The danger comes when we over-identify with them, when we forget we are wearing a mask and believe it is our actual face. Throughout history, philosophers and spiritual teachers have pointed toward this problem. Socrates famously declared, "Know thyself," but he never explained how. He understood that self-knowledge required more than intellectual analysis. It demanded a confrontation with everything we think we know about ourselves, and a willingness to discover we were wrong. The medieval Christian traditions spoke of this as dying to self, not physical suicide, but ego death, the surrender of the false self constructed from others' expectations. Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, wrote, "A person has many skins inside covering the depths of the heart. We know so many things, but we don't know ourselves. Why 30 or 40 skins, or hides as thick and hard as an ox's or bear's, cover the soul?" He was describing the layers of persona we construct to protect the vulnerable core. By the time we reach the modern era, we see this tension explicitly in existential philosophy. Sartre distinguished between being for itself and being for others, recognizing that we constantly oscillate between authentic existence and performance for external eyes. Heidegger wrote of fallenness, the state of being absorbed in the they, doing what they do, believing what they believe, becoming who they expect. Jung brought this into psychological language. He observed that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires first recognizing and then transcending the ego and persona. This does not mean destroying them. The ego remains necessary for navigating reality. The persona allows us to function socially, but they must be seen as tools, not masters, servants, not tyrants. Contemporary psychology validates this. Research on authentic living shows that people who strongly identify with their social roles report higher rates of anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness. Those who can flexibly engage and disengage from roles, who maintain connection to a deeper sense of self beneath performance, demonstrate greater well-being and resilience. There was a woman, let us call her Elena, who never went to bed without checking her phone one last time. Not because she expected important messages, but because she was terrified of the silence. During the day, she was a university lecturer, always on, always performing competence and warmth for her students. At home, she was the understanding partner, the reliable friend, the capable daughter managing her aging parents' needs. But when night came, and there was no one left to perform for, she felt a creeping emptiness. Who was she when no one needed her? What remained when all the roles fell away? The question terrified her because she had no answer. One night her phone died and the charger had broken. She lay in bed with nothing to distract her. At first panic rose, but she breathed through it. And in that darkness, with no screen light to hold back the void, something unexpected happened. She began to cry, not from sadness exactly, but from recognition. She realized she'd been so busy being what everyone needed that she'd forgotten to ask what she needed. Over the following weeks, as she continued to practice lying in darkness without distraction, images and feelings began to emerge. Memories of childhood drawing she'd abandoned because it wasn't practical. Longing for solitude she'd suppressed because she thought it meant something was wrong with her. Anger at always being the one who accommodated, never the one who demanded. These were not comfortable realizations, but they were real. And in their reality, she began to feel something she'd forgotten, the sense of actually existing, not just performing existence. This is what happens when the persona begins to dissolve. The masks we wear are heavy even when we're accustomed to them. Removing them creates both relief and terror. Relief because we can finally breathe freely. Terror because we don't know what face lies beneath. If the ego is the rope tying you to the ground, and the persona is the costume you wear, then surrender is the art of setting both down, not forever, but long enough to remember you exist beyond them. In Western culture, surrender carries connotations of defeat. We are taught that strong people never give up, never quit, always persevere. Surrender sounds like weakness, but Jung understood something deeper. True strength includes the capacity to stop fighting, to recognize when effort has become obstacle rather than aid. Consider the physiology of sleep itself. You cannot force sleep through willpower. The harder you try, the more it eludes you. Sleep comes only when you stop trying, when you release control, and allow the body's natural rhythms to take over. This is surrender, not giving up on sleep, but giving up the attempt to control it. Psychologically, the same principle applies. You cannot will yourself to wholeness. The conscious mind, the ego, is simply too limited. It operates within the frameworks it knows, sees only what it has learned to see. Integration requires accessing the unconscious, that vast reservoir of potential that exists beyond ego's awareness. And the unconscious only speaks when the ego quiets. There is a particular exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from controlling too much. Perhaps you recognize it. The tension in your jaw from forcing smiles, the tightness in your shoulders from carrying burdens you think only you can handle, the constant mental checklist running in the background, making sure everything is managed, nothing forgotten, no one disappointed. This is what Jung called inflation of the ego, the belief that you and you alone are responsible for holding everything together. It creates a kind of psychological tyranny where you cannot rest because you fear what might collapse in your absence. But this fear is itself a symptom of ego identification. It assumes you are the only thing keeping the world running, when in truth, the world ran for billions of years before you and will run long after. Surrender breaks this tyranny. It says, I will stop pretending I control what I do not control. I will release my grip on outcomes I cannot determine. I will trust that something larger than my conscious mind is also at work. In Taoist philosophy, this is Wu Wei, effortless action, or non-action. It does not mean doing nothing, but rather acting from alignment with natural flow rather than against it. Water does not force its way around obstacles. It simply follows the path of least resistance, yet, over time it carves canyons through stone. There was a man, a surgeon, who came to therapy because he could no longer sleep. Despite his exhaustion, the moment he lay down, his mind began reviewing every surgical decision he'd made that day, every possible complication he might have missed. He was excellent at his work, meticulous and skilled. But the responsibility weighed on him unbearably. His therapist asked him a simple question. When you are in surgery, cutting into tissue, do you consciously control every movement of your hand? No, he answered. If I thought about each micro movement, I'd be paralyzed. The skill is embodied. My hands know what to do. So there is a you that knows beyond conscious knowing. The surgeon sat quietly. Then he began to cry. He realized he'd been trying to control even his unconscious competence, unable to trust anything he couldn't consciously monitor. That night, he practiced a different approach. Instead of reviewing decisions, he simply acknowledged, I did my best with the knowledge I had. The rest is not mine to carry. For the first time in months, he slept deeply. Not because his circumstances changed, but because he stopped fighting the limits of his control. This is the essence of surrender in psychology for sleep. You have carried enough today. You have done what you could do. Now is the time to set it down, to trust that the unconscious processes of integration, healing, and restoration will continue without your conscious direction. Neuroscience supports this. The default mode network of the brain activates when we stop directed activity. This network integrates information, consolidates learning, makes creative connections. It does its best work when we are not trying to make it work. Sleep researchers have found that problems we consciously struggle with often resolve during sleep as the brain continues processing below awareness. But surrender is not passive resignation. It is active trust. You are not giving up on life. You are giving up the exhausting attempt to control life. You are not abandoning responsibility. You are releasing the illusion that your conscious mind alone bears all responsibility. Tonight, practice this. As you lie down, mentally list everything you are worried about. Then for each item say quietly, I release this to the night. I trust that if action is needed tomorrow, I will know what to do. For now, I let this go. You may resist. The ego will insist. But if I don't worry about it, nothing will get done. This is the ego's fundamental misunderstanding. Worry is not productive. It is the ego spinning its wheels, creating the illusion of control. Real problem solving happens when the mind is clear, rested, integrated. Surrender creates the conditions for actual wisdom to emerge. Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. When you fight against your tiredness, your confusion, your not knowing, you create more tension. When you accept them, when you surrender to the present reality of being human with limits, something softens. The grasping releases. And in that release, healing becomes possible. This is why psychology for sleep emphasizes acceptance over effort. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to be productive enough to deserve peace. You are allowed to simply stop to let the day end, to trust that sleep will come when you stop chasing it. In surrender, you discover that you are held by forces larger than your individual will. The circadian rhythms that orchestrate sleep, the cellular processes that repair tissue, the unconscious patterns that organize experience into meaning. None of these require your conscious effort. They are gifts already given, waiting for you to simply receive. If you wish to cultivate this relationship with night consciousness, with the dissolution of ego and persona, with the art of surrender, there are practices both ancient and modern that can guide you. Begin simply. Each evening before bed, spend 5 minutes in darkness. Not meditative darkness where you try to clear your mind, but receptive darkness where you simply allow whatever arises to arise. Sit comfortably, turn off all lights and notice what emerges. Thoughts, feelings, images, memories, let them come and go, like clouds across the sky. You are not trying to achieve anything, only to create space for the unconscious to speak. Jung himself practiced what he called active imagination. This involves entering a light trance state and engaging with images from the unconscious as if they were real entities. You might visualize yourself in a landscape and see what figures appear. When they do, you can ask them questions, listen to their responses, even argue with them if needed. This is not fantasy, but a structured conversation between conscious and unconscious. For those just beginning, a simpler version is evening journaling. Write not about what happened during the day, but about what you felt, what surprised you, what confused you. Write until you stumble upon something that makes you pause, something that carries emotional charge. That is where the unconscious is trying to speak. A more structured approach involves dream journaling. Keep a notebook beside your bed. Upon waking before moving or opening your eyes, fully ask yourself, what was I just experiencing? Often fragments of dreams linger in those first moments. Write them down even if they make no sense. Over time, patterns emerge, recurring symbols, repeated themes, persistent characters. These are the unconscious trying to communicate. There are also immersive experiences for those ready to go deeper. Jungian analysis itself, working with a trained therapist, offers sustained engagement with unconscious material. Weekend workshops in active imagination, dream work, or shadow integration can provide intensive exposure to these practices. The key, as Jung emphasized, is balancing engagement with surrender. You cannot force the unconscious to speak, but you can create conditions where it feels safe to emerge. Regular practice, gentle curiosity, non-judgmental attention, these invite depth to surface. For further exploration, several texts stand out. Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections offers his personal account of his own journey into the unconscious. Man and His Symbols provides an accessible introduction to Jungian thought. including extensive work on dream interpretation, Marie-Louise von Francis, The Interpretation of Fairy Tales, shows how archetypal patterns appear in stories across cultures. James Hollis, a contemporary Jungian analyst, has written beautifully on shadow work and individuation in books like Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life and The Eden Project. These make Jungian concepts relevant to modern struggles with relationship purpose and identity. Robert A. Johnson's Inner Work offers practical guidance on dream interpretation and active imagination. His Owning Your Own Shadow provides a clear, compassionate framework for shadow work that is accessible even to beginners. Yet, as with any powerful tool, there are risks in this work. One danger is spiritual bypassing, using psychology for sleep as another form of escape rather than genuine confrontation. If you listen to Jungian ideas only to avoid feeling your actual feelings, you have simply created a more sophisticated distraction. Another risk is inflation, becoming so fascinated with archetypal drama that you lose touch with ordinary human connection. Jung himself warned against this. The goal is not to become a walking symbol or to interpret everything as cosmic meaning. The goal is to become more fully human, more grounded in reality, not less. There is also the danger of using this work to justify avoidance. I'm integrating my shadow can become an excuse for bad behavior. I'm surrendering can mask depression or learned helplessness. The distinction lies in honesty. True shadow work makes you more accountable, not less. True surrender increases capacity for right action, not avoidance of action. It is worth noting that depth psychology engaged seriously can be destabilizing. When you begin to question the ego's constructions, when you start to see through personas you've worn for decades, disorientation follows. This is normal and necessary, but it requires support. If you find yourself overwhelmed, seek professional guidance. This work is not meant to be done in isolation. Finally, understand that there is no completion to this process. Jung himself, even in his 80s, continued to have dreams that challenged him, symbols that confused him, aspects of himself he had not yet integrated. Individuation is not a destination, but a direction. You do not finish becoming yourself. You simply become more practiced at the journey. The ego wants certainty, clear answers, final resolutions. The soul works differently. It spirals, returns to old themes with new depth, revisits wounds to discover fresh healing. This can frustrate the ego, which wants to solve the problem and move on. But the psyche's rhythm is organic, not mechanical. It unfolds in its own time. Understanding night as sacred space, recognizing the necessary dissolution of ego and persona, learning the art of surrender, these create the foundation. But beneath this foundation lie deeper strata, older patterns, archetypal forces that move through the human psyche across all cultures and times. We have explored how you as an individual construct and deconstruct identity each night. But what if beneath your personal story lies a larger narrative? What if the struggles you face with shadow, with wholeness, with meaning, are not uniquely yours, but variations on universal themes that have echoed through humanity? Since consciousness first emerged, Jung called this realm the collective unconscious, and accessing it requires descending further still. We must now leave the territory of personal psychology and enter the mythic dimension, where your individual story becomes transparent to archetypal patterns larger and older than you. The forest at dawn, where we began, is still there, mist clinging to earth. But now, as we step deeper into the trees, we realize this is not just any forest. It is the forest from every fairy tale you ever heard. And moving among the shadows are figures you recognize not from memory, but from something deeper, from the soul's ancient knowing. Let us walk toward them. Have you ever wondered why even in your calmest moments, something inside refuses to rest? A strange whisper, a nameless unease as though some part of you is knocking, waiting to be seen. Carl Jung called that the shadow not a demon, but the part of the soul we hide, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. When night falls and there is no more light to conceal it, the shadow begins to speak. And in psychology for sleep, this is where the real work begins, not in understanding the shadow intellectually, but in feeling its presence in allowing what has been exiled to return home. Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." The shadow is not the enemy. It is the abandoned part of the soul, the tears that never fell, the anger never expressed, the dreams suppressed, the desires judged as wrong. It is the part you once needed to survive, but then were forced to reject in order to be loved, accepted, or good. From a Jungian perspective, shadow formation begins in childhood. You are born whole with full emotional range, but then the world begins to shape you. Your parents praise certain behaviors and punish others. Society rewards conformity and rejects difference. You learn quickly to be loved. I must be this and not that. So you split yourself. The acceptable parts become your conscious identity. The unacceptable parts get pushed down into the unconscious, where they form the personal shadow. A child who is told "don't cry" learns to suppress sadness. A girl taught that anger is unladylike buries her rage. A boy mocked for sensitivity learns to hide tenderness. A person raised to be agreeable represses their capacity for healthy boundaries. These rejected qualities do not disappear. They accumulate in the shadow, waiting, and they make themselves known in indirect ways through projection, through sudden eruptions of emotion, through dreams where you or someone else does terrible things, through the people you inexplicably hate or are inexplicably drawn to. Every time you say, "I'm not like that," it may be the shadow knocking. Every time you judge someone harshly for a trait you claim not to possess, the shadow is speaking. Every time you have an emotional reaction disproportionate to the situation, the shadow is demanding attention. The shadow appears universally in mythology. In Greek myth, it is the Minotaur, the monster at the center of the labyrinth, half human, half beast, created from forbidden desire and hidden away. The hero. Theseus must descend into darkness to face it. He cannot destroy it by force alone. He needs Ariadne's thread to find his way back, the feminine principle of wisdom and connection that prevents the hero from being lost in his own darkness. In fairy tales, the shadow appears as wolves, witches, dark forests, forbidden rooms. Beauty must see past the beast's monstrous exterior to recognize the prince within. Bluebeard's wife discovers the murdered women in the locked chamber, the shadow side of her charming husband. Little Red Riding Hood must face the wolf who wears her grandmother's face, the predator hiding beneath familiar forms. Consider the tale of Sleeping Beauty, which carries profound psychological meaning. The princess is cursed to sleep for 100 years, after pricking her finger on a spindle punishment for her parents' failure to invite the dark fairy to her christening. This is shadow work in narrative form. When we exclude a dark aspect, fail to honor it, pretend it doesn't exist, it curses us with unconsciousness. The 100-year sleep represents the long period many spend in psychological slumber, refusing to wake to their full reality. The prince who awakens her is not rescuing her from outside, but represents the animus, the inner masculine principle that can penetrate the defenses and bring consciousness to what has been sleeping. The entire kingdom sleeps with her, because when our consciousness is split, our entire inner world freezes in development. These are not just stories, they are psychological maps. When you dream of being chased by a dark figure that is your shadow, when you dream of discovering hidden rooms in your house, that is unconscious material trying to surface. When you dream of wild animals or monstrous beings, the psyche is showing you the instinctual, rejected parts of yourself. The work is not to defeat the shadow, but to integrate it. Integration means recognizing that you contain multitudes, both light and dark, both socially acceptable and taboo. It means admitting, yes, I am capable of cruelty. Yes, I contain selfishness. Yes, I have desires I've been taught to deny. And in that admission, the shadow loses its power to control you from the unconscious. Beneath the shadow lies another figure, older and more vulnerable. Jung called this the divine child archetype, but in its wounded form it appears as the inner child, the part of you that experienced hurts you could not process, that learned to protect itself through silence, through performance, through becoming invisible. Have you ever wondered why, despite being grown and capable, a single criticism can make your heart shrink like a child abandoned? That is because the inner child in you has never truly been comforted. It is still sitting somewhere in the dim room of memory, waiting for the hug it never received. Jung understood that in every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, that is never completed. This is not regression, but a vital part of the psyche that holds spontaneity, creativity, wonder, and also the wounds that shaped us. When you were young, you learned that to be loved, you had to be good. So you began to shrink yourself. You hid your crying, hid your anger, hid even your spontaneous joy, anything that could make others leave. But those emotions did not disappear. They were only pressed down, asleep inside the soul. Then when you grew up, they returned, in the form of fear of rejection, of anxiety when someone doesn't reply, of exhaustion from always trying to be the good one. You think these are adult problems, but they are child wounds still bleeding beneath the surface. In literature, we see this pattern repeatedly. In Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, Pip's entire life is shaped by childhood shame the moment he was made to feel small and common. He builds a persona of gentility to escape that feeling, but it haunts him still. In Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, the protagonist carries childhood wounds of abandonment and unworthiness into adulthood, where they manifest as difficulty trusting love when it finally arrives. Contemporary memoirs reveal the same pattern. Mary Carr's The Liars Club traces how childhood trauma in a chaotic Texas household shaped her adult struggles with addiction and relationship. Tara Westover's Educated shows how being raised in isolation creates an inner child who doubts her right to exist in the wider world, even after escaping physically. The therapeutic work with the inner child, developed from Jung's ideas by therapists, like John Bradshaw, involves what is called reparenting, becoming the parent to yourself that you needed, but perhaps did not have. This does not mean blaming your actual parents. They were shaped by their own wounds. It means recognizing that the hurt child within you still needs care, and that you, the adult you have become, can provide it. Visualization practices invite you to imagine meeting your child self. You might picture yourself at the age when a particular wound occurred. See that child clearly, their clothes, their expression, the way they hold their body. Then, with your adult awareness, approach them. Sit beside them. Perhaps hold them if they allow it. Tell them what they needed to hear, then but did not. You are safe. You are loved. You are enough exactly as you are. This is not fantasy. Neuroscience research on memory reconsolidation shows that when we recall a traumatic memory in a safe, supportive context, the brain can actually update that memory, integrating new emotional information. The past does not change, but our relationship to it can transform. A powerful contemporary example is actor and comedian Jim Carrey. Known worldwide for his manic energy and laughter, Carrey has spoken openly about using performance to mask childhood pain. His father's unemployment, his family's poverty, the responsibility he felt to keep everyone happy. These shaped him into someone who made laughter his survival strategy. In interviews later in life, Carrey has said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." What he discovered is that no amount of external success heals the inner child who learned to hide pain behind a smile. That healing requires facing the wound, directly sitting with the loneliness and fear, allowing the child within to finally be seen. When you practice psychology for sleep with awareness of the inner child, bedtime becomes a reparenting ritual. Before sleep, you can quietly acknowledge, "I see you. I know you have been lonely. But I am here now. You do not need to fix anything." The child does not need solutions. It needs presence, acceptance, the simple knowing that it is no longer alone. As we descend deeper still into the psyche, we encounter not just personal figures, but archetypal ones, patterns that transcend individual experience and appear across all human cultures. Jung discovered that certain symbolic figures appear universally: the mother, the father, the hero, the trickster, the wise old man, the wise old woman, the lover, the warrior. These are not just metaphors. They are organizing principles of the psyche, patterns of energy and behavior that humans have embodied for millennia. When activated, they can possess us, taking over consciousness and directing behavior from the unconscious. Consider the mother archetype. In its positive form, she is nurturing, protective, life-giving. The good mother who feeds, comforts, and sustains. But the mother also has a shadow side, the devouring mother who smothers, controls, prevents growth. Every actual mother embodies both aspects to some degree. In tarot symbolism, we see these archetypes clearly. The Empress represents the nurturing mother. The High Priestess represents the wise woman who guards the threshold between conscious and unconscious. The Emperor represents structured masculine authority. The Hanged Man, particularly relevant for psychology for sleep, represents surrender, the necessary suspension between states where transformation becomes possible. The Hanged Man hangs upside down, not in torture, but in voluntary sacrifice. He has stopped striving, he has released control. And in that suspension, he gains a new perspective. What looked one way right side up appears entirely different, inverted. This is the archetype of surrender we discussed earlier, now appearing in symbolic form. Consider how these archetypes might be active in your own life. When you cannot stop taking care of others, even to your own detriment, the mother archetype may be inflated, operating unconsciously, demanding that you always nurture, regardless of your own needs. When you constantly feel you must prove yourself through achievement, the hero archetype may be driving you, seeking the next conquest, unable to rest. When you find yourself making impulsive decisions or saying things that surprise you, the trickster may be active. That archetypal energy that disrupts order, plays with rules, reveals truth through chaos. When you feel called to withdraw from the world to study, contemplate, or create, the hermit archetype may be speaking. The work is not to identify with one archetype exclusively, but to recognize them all as parts of a larger whole. You contain the mother and the warrior. You hold both, lover and hermit. The question is, which energies are currently active, and are they serving your wholeness or fragmenting you? In dreams, archetypes often appear as powerful figures. An old woman who knows secrets, a warrior who fights on your behalf, a child who leads you somewhere unexpected, a lover who sees you truly. These are not just random dream characters. They are aspects of your own psyche taken symbolic form to communicate with consciousness. There was a woman who kept dreaming of being in a castle where she had to clean endlessly. Every room she cleaned would become dirty again immediately. She woke exhausted, as if she'd been working all night. When she brought this dream to analysis, her therapist asked, "Who in your waking life are you constantly trying to clean up after?" The woman realized she'd become the eternal mother, always fixing others' problems, never allowing anyone, including herself, to fail or struggle. The dream was showing her the futility of this pattern. Cleanliness, psychological order could not be imposed from outside. Each person must do their own work. As she began to set boundaries to stop rescuing others from natural consequences, the dream changed. She found herself in the castle again, but this time she set down the cleaning supplies and walked out into the garden. There she met a wise old woman who smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to stop performing my role." This is how archetypes teach, not through lectures but through embodied experience in dreams and wakened life. When you learn to recognize them, you can dialogue with them, learn from them, allow them to guide you towards greater wholeness. To understand how archetypal work actually functions, let us enter a specific story, a woman named Emma, and her journey into the garden of her own unconscious. Emma was a designer in London, admired for her aesthetic precision and creative vision. But beneath the polished exterior, she felt hollow. Every project felt like performance. Every compliment felt empty. She could not name what was missing, only that life felt like living in sepia tones, muted and distant. One night, exhausted from another late deadline, Emma fell into deep sleep and dreamed. She found herself standing before a vast garden, once beautiful, but now desolate. The flowers were dead, the grass brown and cracked. Trees stood like skeletons against the gray sky. It was utterly silent. No birds, no wind, no life. Emma walked through this wasteland, feeling profound sadness. Then in a corner beneath a dying tree, she saw a small girl, perhaps 6 years old, with dark eyes that stared without speaking. Emma approached slowly. The child did not move, did not acknowledge her, simply sat hugging her knees. "Who are you?" Emma whispered. The child said nothing, but Emma understood. This was herself, the part of her that had learned very young to be quiet, to not ask for too much, to make herself small, so as not to burden her overwhelmed mother. The garden was her inner landscape, and it had died from neglect. Emma sat beside the child and began to cry. In the dream, her tears fell onto the dead earth, and where they landed, the ground darkened with moisture. Small green shoots began to push through the cracks. The child looked up for the first time and placed her small hand in Emma's. Emma woke with tears on her pillow. The feeling stayed with her all day, a strange mixture of grief and hope. That night before bed, she lit a candle and wrote in her journal, "I am so sorry I forgot you. I am here now." Over the following weeks, Emma's dreams continued. The garden appeared again and again, slowly transforming. Flowers bloomed, not the manicured roses of her professional aesthetic, but wild, chaotic blossoms in colors she'd never choose. The child began to speak, asking questions. "Why did you stop painting? Why do you always say yes when you mean no? When did you decide it was wrong to want things?" Emma realized these were questions she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. She had built a successful career, but it was built on a foundation of pleasing others, of suppressing her authentic desires in favor of commercial viability. The child was calling her back to something more essential. In Jungian terms, the garden represents the psyche itself. Its condition reflects the state of the soul. The dying garden showed Emma that her inner life had been neglected, sacrificed to outer achievement. The child represented not just a past version of herself, but an archetypal energy, the divine child. That aspect of the psyche that holds creativity, spontaneity, and connection to the numinous. As Emma began to honor this inner child, taking time for painting, she would never show anyone, saying no to projects that felt spiritually dead, allowing herself to want things without justification. The dream shifted. The garden grew lush. The child grew older, more confident. In one powerful dream, the child became a young woman who said, "Thank you for choosing me." Why? Emma woke knowing something fundamental had changed. This is the power of engaging archetypal material in psychology for sleep. Dreams are not random neural firing. They are the psyche's attempt to communicate what consciousness is avoiding. When we listen, when we honor what they show us, transformation becomes possible. Every archetypal pattern has both light and shadow expressions. The mother can nurture or smother. The warrior can protect or destroy. The lover can connect or consume. The trickster can liberate through disruption or create chaos without purpose. In the Greek myth of Medusa, we see the shadow side of the feminine. Medusa was once beautiful, but was cursed to become monstrous, her gaze turning men to stone. Perseus, the hero, must face her, but crucially, he cannot look at her directly. He uses his polished shield as a mirror, seeing her reflection rather than meeting her gaze. Jung would say this illustrates how we must approach the shadow. We cannot confront it directly with the ego's full force. That path leads to either being overwhelmed, turned to stone, or to rigid defensiveness. Instead, we need reflection, the capacity to see ourselves indirectly through dreams, through projections we notice in others, through slips of tongue and surprising emotions. When Perseus beheads Medusa, from her blood springs Pegasus, the winged horse symbol of creative inspiration and spiritual ascent. This shows that integrating shadow material releases energy previously bound in repression. What was monstrous becomes magical when properly faced. In modern culture, this pattern appears everywhere if we know how to see it. Consider the character of Darth Vader in Star Wars, a powerful figure consumed by his shadow side, literally wearing a black mask. His redemption comes only when his son Luke refuses to destroy him, choosing instead to see the light still present beneath the darkness. This is shadow integration, not eliminating the dark, but recognizing it as part of a larger whole. Or consider the contemporary fascination with anti-heroes in television. Walter White, Tony Soprano, Don Draper. These characters allow audiences to vicariously explore shadow, material, violence, greed, sexual transgression, moral ambiguity. We are drawn to them because they act out what we repress. But the best of these stories do not glorify the shadow. They show its costs, its contradictions, its ultimate failure to bring satisfaction. While the shadow begins as personal traits you as an individual reject, it also has a collective dimension. Societies like individuals have shadows, aspects of human nature they deny or project onto others. Jung observed that when a culture represses certain energies, they do not disappear, but accumulate in the collective unconscious. Then, they erupt through war, through scapegoating, through moral panics, where society projects its denied qualities onto a targeted group. In contemporary culture, we see archetypal patterns playing out through social media, celebrity worship, political polarization. The hero archetype appears in superhero films that dominate global cinema, reflecting perhaps a collective longing for someone to save us from overwhelming complexity. The trickster appears in viral internet culture, constantly disrupting established narratives, revealing hypocrisy, playing with truth. The shadow appears in how we collectively treat the other, immigrants, the poor, those of different ideologies. By projecting our fear and hatred onto external enemies, we avoid confronting the fear and hatred within. This is why Jung insisted that individual shadow work has political implications. If enough people reclaim their projections, collective violence becomes harder to sustain. For psychology, for sleep, this means recognizing that your personal nighttime journey connects to something larger. When you face your shadow, when you comfort your inner child, when you allow archetypes to move through you consciously rather than unconsciously, you contribute to collective healing, not in a grandiose way, but through the simple act of becoming more whole yourself. We have walked through the garden of archetypal psychology, meeting shadow and child warrior, and mother trickster and wise one. We have seen how these patterns appear in myths, dreams, and daily life. But you may wonder, is this just poetic language? Or is there substance beneath the symbols? The answer is both. The psyche speaks in symbols because that is its natural language. But these symbols point to real structures, real patterns that can be observed, measured, even located in neurobiology. As we prepare to descend into the third pillar, the scientific understanding of how sleep facilitates integration, we carry with us the archetypal wisdom, not leaving it behind, but seeing how ancient knowledge and modern science converge on the same truths from different angles. The forest grows darker now. The symbolic gives way to the cellular. The mythic meets the neurological. And we discover that the Psyche Jung, mapped through dreams and active imagination, has a biology, a chemistry, a physics we are only beginning to understand. Let us enter that territory now, where psychology for sleep reveals its mechanisms. Jung made a radical claim. Within every man exists a feminine principle he called the anima. And within every woman exists a masculine principle she called the animus. These are not social constructs, but archetypal realities, patterns of energy and consciousness that transcend biological sex. From a scientific perspective, we might understand this through the research on psychological androgyny. Studies by Sandra Bem and others in the 1970s and beyond showed that individuals who score high on both masculine and feminine psychological traits, what she termed androgynous personalities, demonstrate better mental health, greater adaptability, and higher life satisfaction than those rigidly identified with one gender role. Masculine energy in the Jungian sense relates to differentiation, boundary-setting goal orientation, logical analysis, assertiveness. Feminine energy relates to relatedness, receptivity, intuition, emotional attunement, synthesis. Every human being requires both. The question is not whether we have them, but whether they are conscious and integrated, or unconscious and split. When anima is unconscious in a man, he projects it onto women, seeking in them the qualities he denies in himself: emotion, intuition, connection. The woman becomes his soul, which is why her moods affect him so profoundly, and why her leaving devastates his sense of self. He has not yet met his own inner woman. There was a man, call him David, a creative director in New York, successful, respected, seemingly confident. Yet every night he could not sleep. His mind raced with fears of failure, of not being enough, of losing what he had built. His life felt like constant performance with no rest. In therapy, David described recurring dreams of a woman standing by a lake. She never spoke, only looked at him with an expression of deep sadness. Then she would dissolve into the water. He found the dreams disturbing, but could not interpret them. His analyst explained the concept of anima. The woman in his dreams represented his own capacity for feeling, for vulnerability, for simply being, rather than doing. He had spent his life in masculine energy, achieving, building, conquering, while denying himself access to the feminine qualities of receptivity and emotional depth. David was skeptical at first. He thought of himself as emotionally intelligent. But as he examined his life more honestly, he realized he could analyze emotions, but not truly feel them. He could recognize when he should be sad, but could not cry. He understood intellectually that he needed rest, but could not allow himself to stop. The work of integrating anima required David to literally practice doing nothing, to sit without purpose, to feel without needing to fix, to allow tears without demanding they mean something. It was excruciatingly difficult for him. One evening he sat in his apartment with no music, no screens, no agenda, just sitting. His chest tightened with anxiety. Every fiber wanted to get up, do something, produce. But he stayed. And after perhaps 20 minutes, something broke. He began to sob, not from any particular sadness, but from the sheer relief of finally stopping. That night the dream changed. The woman by the lake smiled. She did not disappear. She simply sat down, inviting him to join her. He woke feeling something he had not felt in years: peace. Similarly, when animus is unconscious in a woman, she may project it onto men seeking in them the qualities she denies herself: strength, decisiveness, authority. Or it may manifest as an inner critical voice, harsh, judgmental, demanding perfection. This is animus in its negative form, unintegrated masculine energy turned against the self. There was a woman, call her Claire, a psychologist who helped hundreds of others but felt fragmented inside. She dreamed repeatedly of chasing a faceless man she could never reach. The dream left her feeling abandoned and afraid. Her own therapist helped her see that the masculine energy she was chasing externally existed within her, but had become distorted through repression. Instead of healthy assertion and boundaries, her animus had become criticism and control. The voice that said, "You're not doing enough," was animus, but in shadow form. Integrating animus for Claire meant learning to embody healthy masculine qualities, consciously saying no, setting clear boundaries, protecting her own time and energy. As she did this work, the chasing dreams stopped. Instead, she dreamed of walking beside a man who eventually revealed himself to be her own reflection in masculine form. Integration had occurred. While Jung worked primarily with symbols and subjective experience, modern neuroscience has revealed the biological mechanisms through which sleep facilitates psychological integration. The convergence between Jungian insight and contemporary brain science is remarkable during sleep, particularly during REM rapid eye movement, sleep. The brain undergoes processes that consolidate emotional memories, integrate new learning with existing knowledge, and literally wash away toxic metabolic byproducts. This is not metaphor, it is measurable physiology. The glymphatic system discovered relatively recently is a brain-wide network that clears waste during sleep. Cerebrospinal fluid flows through the brain at twice the rate during sleep, as during waking, flushing out beta amyloid and other potentially harmful proteins. When sleep is disrupted, this cleansing process is incomplete, which may partly explain the correlation between chronic sleep deprivation and neurological decline. But the cleaning is not just physical. Emotionally charged experiences from the day are processed during sleep, particularly during REM phases, when the brain shows activity patterns similar to waking consciousness. But with a crucial difference: the prefrontal cortex responsible for executive control and rational analysis is less active, while the limbic system responsible for emotion is highly active. This creates conditions where emotional memories can be integrated without the ego's defensive interference. The very dissolution of ego control that Jung described phenomenologically occurs neurobiologically during sleep. The defensive structures soften, allowing unconscious material to surface and be processed. Research by Matthew Walker and others has shown that REM sleep specifically helps regulate emotional reactivity. When we sleep after emotionally difficult experiences, the emotional charge associated with those memories decreases, while the factual content remains accessible. We remember what happened, but feel less overwhelmed by it. This is biological shadow integration, the toxic charge of repressed material being metabolized and integrated. The default mode network DMN becomes active during rest, including certain sleep stages. This network, which includes the medial prefrontal cortex posterior, cingulate cortex, and precuneus, is associated with self-referential thinking, autobiographical memory, and imagining the future. When we stop directed activity and allow the DMN to operate, the brain makes connections between disparate elements of experience, creating narrative coherence from fragmented information. From a Jungian perspective, this is the unconscious doing its organizing work, finding patterns, creating meaning, integrating split-off parts. The DMN might be understood as the neurobiological substrate of what Jung called the self, that organizing principle beyond ego that seeks wholeness. Interestingly, meditation practices and mindfulness, which share qualities with the surrender practices Jung advocated, also modulate DMN activity. Regular practitioners show different patterns of DMN activation, maintaining awareness even during default mode processing. This suggests a state of consciousness where ego and self communicate more directly, where conscious and unconscious operate in concert rather than opposition. For psychology for sleep, this means that the nighttime journey into unconsciousness is not passive or random. It is an active, biologically orchestrated process of integration, healing, and meaning-making. When you sleep, your brain literally rewires itself, strengthening some neural connections and pruning others, consolidating learning, processing emotion, and preparing you for the next day's challenges. The capacity for healthy sleep, both physically and psychologically, develops across the lifespan. Infants spend more time in REM sleep than adults, suggesting that this state is crucial for brain development and learning. But psychological factors also shape sleep from the beginning. Attachment theory developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth shows that early relational experiences affect the ability to regulate emotion and self-soothe capacities essential for healthy sleep. Securely attached infants learn that when they cry, someone responds. The world is safe enough to relax into. This foundational trust allows the nervous system to shift into parasympathetic mode, the rest and digest state necessary for sleep. Insecurely attached children show different patterns. Anxious attachment develops when caregiving is inconsistent. The child learns to be hypervigilant, constantly monitoring for abandonment. This hypervigilance persists into adulthood, as difficulty shutting off the mind, always scanning for threat, even when objectively safe. These individuals often report racing thoughts at bedtime, difficulty trusting that sleep will come, fear of losing control, by surrendering to unconsciousness. Avoidant attachment develops when emotional needs are consistently unmet. The child learns to suppress needs and emotions to be self-sufficient. As adults, these individuals may have difficulty accessing emotion, even during therapy. They often describe feeling numb or disconnected. Their sleep may appear normal on the surface, but it lacks the deep restorative quality that comes from genuine emotional integration. Disorganized attachment, often resulting from trauma or abuse, creates the most difficulty with sleep. The caregiver, who should be a source of safety, is also a source of threat. The nervous system never learns to truly relax. Hypervigilance becomes chronic. Many adults with trauma histories describe either profound insomnia or sleeping excessively as a form of escape, both indicating dysregulation rather than healthy sleep. Jung understood this intuitively. He recognized that the capacity for healthy ego dissolution and trust in the unconscious develops through secure early attachments. When the child experiences the world as fundamentally safe, they can later in life release conscious control without existential terror. When early life is chaotic or threatening, that capacity is impaired. Adolescence brings another transformation. Sleep patterns shift. Teenagers naturally want to stay up later, and sleep later a circadian rhythm change that serves important developmental purposes. But adolescence is also when many psychological disorders first emerge, often manifesting as sleep disturbance. Depression in adolescence frequently presents as hypersomnia, sleeping excessively as escape. Anxiety presents as insomnia, lying awake worrying about social acceptance, future possibilities, existential questions. These are not just symptoms to suppress, but potentially meaningful communications from the psyche about developmental struggles. In adulthood, the quality of sleep often reflects the quality of psychic integration. Those who have done shadow work, who have comfortable relationships with their inner child, who have balanced anima and animus, these individuals generally report better sleep. Those carrying unprocessed trauma, rigid defenses, chronic persona performance, these report more sleep difficulty. Interestingly, midlife often brings a natural return to depth psychology. Jung called this the individuation crisis of the second half of life, when the ego's achievements feel hollow and the soul demands attention. Many people experience sleep disruption during this transition, as the unconscious insists on being heard. What looks like pathology may actually be the psyche demanding necessary transformation. In older adulthood, sleep architecture changes again. Less deep sleep, more fragmented sleep, earlier wake times. But research shows that these changes are not inherently pathological. Elders who maintain purpose, who have done the work of integrating their lives into coherent narrative, often report satisfaction with sleep despite its changed quality. They have learned, perhaps, that rest is not the same as unconsciousness, that peace comes from acceptance rather than resistance. While Jung's approach was primarily clinical and phenomenological, rather than experimental, contemporary research has begun to investigate some of his core concepts using empirical methods. Research on projection, the process of seeing our own unconscious qualities in others, has validated Jung's observations. Studies show that the traits we most strongly attribute to others often correlate with traits we deny in ourselves. People who score high on measures of hostility are more likely to perceive hostility in others' neutral expressions. Those who suppress sexual thoughts are more vigilant in detecting sexual content in ambiguous stimuli. This is exactly what Jung predicted. What we repress in ourselves, we project onto the world. The shadow does not disappear through denial. It colors our perception, making us see everywhere what we refuse to see within. Dream research has also validated some Jungian ideas. While mainstream sleep science has often dismissed dreams as meaningless byproducts of random neural activation, more sophisticated research shows otherwise. Deirdre Barrett at Harvard has demonstrated that dreams often present creative solutions to waking problems, suggesting that unconscious processing during sleep serves adaptive functions. Research on recurring dreams shows that they often reflect unresolved conflicts or persistent threats, exactly what Jung would predict. When the wakened mind refuses to address something important, The dreaming mind continues to present it symbolically until integration occurs. Studies on synchronicity, Jung's concept of meaningful coincidence, are more controversial, but intriguing. While causation cannot be proven, research shows that people going through major life transitions report more synchronistic experiences. This could be explained by heightened attention and pattern recognition, or it could suggest, as Jung believed, that inner transformation alters our relationship to external events in ways science does not yet fully understand. The concept of archetypes has found some support in cross-cultural psychology. Certain symbolic themes do appear universally: mother figures, hero journeys, death, rebirth cycles, sacred marriage, the union of opposites. Whether this reflects innate cognitive structures, as Jung believed, or universal human experiences, as critics argue, remains debated. But the universality of certain symbolic patterns is empirically demonstrable. In clinical psychology, Jungian analytical psychology has been subjected to outcome research. While less extensively studied than CBT or psychodynamic therapy, available research suggests that Jungian analysis produces significant and sustained improvements in depression, anxiety, and general well-being. Interestingly, changes often continue after therapy ends, suggesting that the process initiated during treatment has ongoing effects consistent with Jung's view that analysis begins an individuation process that continues throughout life. For psychology, for sleep specifically, research shows that practices derived from Jungian ideas, journaling about dreams, active imagination, mindfulness, meditation, all correlate with improved sleep quality. These practices seem to help bridge conscious and unconscious, reducing the internal conflict that manifests as insomnia. Not everyone experiences sleep or the unconscious in the same way. Personality traits, temperament, and psychological type all influence how we relate to night consciousness. In Jung's system of psychological types, he distinguished between introverts who naturally turn inward, deriving energy from interior reflection, and extroverts who turn outward, energized by external interaction. For introverts, the transition to sleep may feel more natural, even welcome. It is a return to their preferred orientation. For extroverts, night can feel isolating, even threatening. The absence of external stimulation creates discomfort. Similarly, Jung identified thinking types who prefer logic and analysis, and feeling types who prefer values and emotion. Thinking types may struggle with the non-rational nature of dreams, trying to decode them rather than simply experiencing them. Feeling types may be overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of unconscious material surfacing during sleep. Contemporary personality psychology offers complementary frameworks. The Big Five model identifies neuroticism as a key dimension. Those high in neuroticism experience more negative emotion and perceive more threat. Research consistently shows that high neuroticism correlates with poor sleep difficulty, falling asleep, frequent waking, non-restorative sleep. From a Jungian perspective, this suggests the shadow is more active, more insistent, harder to integrate for these individuals. Conscientiousness, the tendency toward organization, discipline, and goal orientation, correlates with better sleep hygiene, but can also create rigidity. Highly conscientious people may struggle with the surrender required for deep sleep, needing to maintain control even in rest. Openness to experience, curiosity, Imagination. Willingness to explore novel ideas correlates with more vivid dreams and better dream recall. These individuals may find Jungian approaches particularly resonant, as they already value interior exploration. Attachment styles also predict sleep patterns. As mentioned earlier, anxious attachment correlates with hypervigilance and difficulty trusting enough to sleep deeply. Avoidant attachment correlates with emotional numbing that may allow sleep, but prevents the kind of emotional processing that makes sleep genuinely restorative. Secure attachment correlates with healthy sleep, the capacity to relax into vulnerability without defensiveness. Highly sensitive persons. HSPs identified by Elaine Aron's research process, sensory and emotional information more deeply than others. This trait present in about 20% of the population correlates with both gifts and challenges. HSPs often have rich inner lives, vivid dreams, and strong intuition qualities Jung valued, but they also experience overwhelm, more easily need more downtime to process experience, and may struggle with sleep when overstimulated. For psychology for sleep, this means approaches must be individualized. What helps one person access the unconscious may create resistance in another. Introverts may benefit from extended evening solitude. Extroverts may need brief social connection before transitioning to sleep. Thinking types may need structured journaling. Feeling types may need artistic expression. The key is finding approaches that honor your particular psyche, rather than forcing conformity to a single method. In the 1940s and 50s, Jung engaged in an extraordinary collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics. Their dialogue explored the relationship between psychology and physics, leading to Jung's mature formulation of synchronicity and the concept of onus mundus, the unified reality underlying both psyche and matter. Pauli had experienced disturbing dreams and psychological disturbances. He sought Jung's help, and in the process of analysis, both men were struck by parallels between psychological and physical phenomena. In quantum mechanics, observation affects what is observed. The act of measurement changes the quantum state. Subject and object cannot be cleanly separated. Jung saw parallels in psychology. The therapist and client form a unified field. The analyst's unconscious constellates material in the patient, and vice versa. What emerges in therapy is not solely in the patient's psyche, but in the relationship itself, what Jung called the transcendent function arising between them. Both quantum physics and depth psychology challenge the Cartesian split between mind and matter, subject and object. Both suggest a more fluid participatory reality, where consciousness and the observed world mutually influence each other. Synchronicity. Meaningful coincidence represented for Jung the observable evidence of this unified reality. When inner and outer events align meaningfully, but without causal connection, it suggests that psyche and matter are two aspects of a single underlying process. Pauli contributed the concept of complementarity from physics. In quantum mechanics, light behaves sometimes as a wave, sometimes as a particle, depending on how you observe it. Both descriptions are true, but they cannot be observed simultaneously. You must choose which aspect to measure. Jung suggested psyche and matter might be complementary in the same way. They are two aspects of onus mundus, the unified world, that can be observed from different perspectives. but are ultimately the same reality viewed differently. For psychology for sleep, this has profound implications. When you sleep, the boundary between inner and outer softens. Dreams blend memory, imagination, and sometimes seemingly precognitive or telepathic content. The clear distinction between self and world that ego maintains during waking consciousness dissolves. This is not pathology, but a return to a more primary mode of being where consciousness participates in reality rather than merely observing it. Indigenous cultures that practice dream work have always known this. The dream world is not less real than the waking world. It is differently real, offering information not accessible to waking consciousness. Scientists studying exceptional human experiences, precognitive dreams, telepathic impressions, meaningful synchronicities have found that these phenomena, while not explicable by conventional causality, show statistical patterns suggesting something real is occurring. Dean Radin's research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has demonstrated small but consistent effects in controlled studies of phenomena, like presentiment, the body's physiological response to future random events. Whether these effects point to psychic phenomena, to quantum entanglement affecting consciousness, or to more subtle forms of information processing, we don't yet understand, remains unclear. But they suggest, as Jung and Pauli proposed, that the relationship between mind and world is more intimate than classical science acknowledged. As you enter sleep tonight, you enter this mystery. The boundaries soften. The unconscious speaks not just through personal symbols, but through connections to the larger field of being. You are not a separate self locked in a skull. You are a process, a pattern, a wave in a larger ocean temporarily knowing itself as distinct. Let that knowledge inform your rest. You are held by more than your individual will. Something larger is at work arranging, connecting, creating meaning. Surrendering to sleep is surrendering to participation in this larger intelligence. Now we must shift. Until this moment, we have spoken about you in third person analyzing psychology for sleep from outside. But that distance has been a protection, hasn't it? A way to consume information without implication. To learn about the psyche without facing your own. That ends now. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in months, and within an hour they text you. Coincidence, you say. You dream of a specific image, say a broken bridge, and the next day encounter that exact phrase in a conversation you couldn't have predicted. Random, you assure yourself. You keep seeing repeating numbers, the same song appearing in different contexts. People mentioning the same book independently. At first you dismiss it. Confirmation bias, you explain. Pattern seeking in a random universe. But then it keeps happening. The phone call at the exact moment you needed it. The job posting appearing the day after you decided to make a change. The stranger who says exactly what you needed to hear, as if they'd been eavesdropping on your thoughts. You tell yourself, this means nothing. But something in you knows better. Jung called this synchronicity meaningful coincidence. Not causation, but correlation of inner and outer events that cannot be explained by chance alone. And the truth you haven't wanted to admit is that synchronicities increase when you're paying attention, when you're doing the inner work, when you're living from the self, rather than the ego. Because here's what nobody wants to say directly. The universe is not neutral. It responds. not mechanically like a vending machine where you insert virtue coins and receive blessings, but organically like an ecosystem where your participation affects the whole. When you transform internally, external circumstances shift to reflect that transformation, not because you manifested them through positive thinking, but because you are not separate from the world you perceive. Your psyche and your life are not two things. They are one thing viewed from different angles. The pattern you need to see is this: you have spent years, perhaps decades, living from the ego, trying to control, manage, optimize. You've performed persona after persona, exhausted yourself, maintaining the masks. And despite all that effort, despite all that striving, you still feel empty, still cannot sleep, still sense that something essential is missing. Because it is. What's missing is not outside you. It's not the right relationship, the perfect job, the ideal body, the sufficient bank account. What's missing is the connection between your conscious life and your unconscious depths. You have split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, light and shadow, and the psychic energy lost in maintaining that split is enormous. That's why you're exhausted. Not from life, but from resistance. Every time you suppress an emotion because it's inconvenient. Every time you perform cheerfulness when you feel empty. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you scroll to avoid feeling, watch, to avoid thinking, speak, to avoid silence, you are creating internal fragmentation. And that fragmentation prevents the deep rest that comes only from wholeness. This is not entirely your fault. You did not choose this fragmentation freely. You were conditioned into it. From childhood, you received messages. Be good, be strong, be successful. Don't cry, don't get angry. Don't be too much or too little. Fit in, stand out. Be unique but not weird. Be confident but not arrogant. Be vulnerable but not weak. Impossible contradictions, all designed to make you manageable, predictable, productive. To turn you into a well-functioning unit in systems that profit from your disconnection from yourself. Schools taught you to ignore your body's rhythms, to sit still for hours, to focus on external authority rather than internal knowing. Workplaces rewarded performance over presence, output over authenticity. Media sold you endless products to fix the inadequacy they first convinced you was real. And all of it taught you subtly, but persistently, to fear your own depths. The shadow, dangerous. The unconscious, irrational. Dreams, meaningless. Emotion. Weakness. Intuition. Unreliable. Stillness. Unproductive. The inner child. Regressive. The self doesn't exist. There's only ego trying harder. So you learn to live entirely on the surface. To skim across life's surface, like a stone skipping on water, touching, but never sinking, moving, but never settling. And you call this success. But at night, when you finally stop, the depths call to you. And you resist because you've been taught that going deep is dangerous, that you might drown, that you might discover things about yourself that are unacceptable. Women especially are taught to fear their anger, their ambition, their desire for solitude, to channel everything into caretaking, to make themselves endlessly available, to suppress the animus energy of healthy assertion in favor of accommodating everyone else's needs. Men are taught to fear their vulnerability, their need for connection, their capacity for tenderness, to reject the anima energy of feeling and receptivity in favor of stoic self-sufficiency that is actually just disconnection wearing a mask of strength. Everyone is taught to fear the shadow, those aspects of human nature deemed socially unacceptable. But the shadow does not disappear through repression. It simply operates unconsciously, sabotaging the very goals the ego sets. The system benefits from your disconnection. Disconnected people consume more, trying to fill the void with purchases. They work longer hours having nothing deeper to live for. They don't question authority too fragmented to trust their own knowing. They medicate symptoms rather than addressing causes, keeping pharmaceutical companies profitable. They doom scroll through curated lives, feeling inadequate enough to keep clicking, never satisfied enough to stop. This is not conspiracy. It is simply what happens when an entire culture loses connection to depth, when psychology for sleep becomes a commodity, rather than a sacred practice, when night becomes just another time to be productive, catching up on shows, answering emails, planning tomorrow's performance. But you can choose differently. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Every pattern you keep repeating, choosing the same type of unavailable partner, sabotaging opportunities when they approach, feeling exhausted, no matter how much you rest, snapping at people you love, then feeling guilty, these are not character flaws. They are unconscious patterns playing out. The shadow directs you toward situations where it can be seen if only you'd look. The inner child arranges circumstances where old wounds can either deepen or finally heal. The unintegrated anima or animus attracts relationships that mirror what you haven't integrated within yourself. And you call this bad luck. You call this other people's fault. You call this just how life is. It's not. It's fate generated by the unconscious operating autonomously, and it will continue until you face what you've been avoiding. Shadow work asks, what do you judge most harshly in others? That quality lives in you, denied and repressed. The coworker whose laziness enrages you, you suppress your own need for rest. The friend whose neediness exhausts you, you deny your own needs for connection. The person whose confidence you find arrogant, you're terrified of your own power. Everything that irritates you about others can lead you to understanding of yourself, but only if you're willing to stop pointing outward and turn the gaze inward. Projection Reclamation asks, who are you blaming for your unhappiness? What are you waiting for them to change so you can finally be okay? Every ounce of energy invested in trying to change another person is energy stolen from changing yourself. Every moment spent waiting for apologies, for recognition, for them to finally understand that's your life passing, while you refuse to take responsibility for your own wholeness. You are not reacting to them. You are reacting to what they trigger in you. The wound they touch was there before you met them and will remain after they're gone unless you do the work of healing it yourself. And here's the part that will make you uncomfortable. You chose them precisely because they would trigger that wound. Not consciously, of course. The unconscious orchestrated the whole thing. You were drawn to them because some part of you knew that this relationship would force you to confront what you've been avoiding. The partner who can't commit mirrors your own fear of intimacy. The friend who betrays you reflects your history of betraying yourself. The parent who couldn't see you taught you not to see yourself. Every painful dynamic is also an invitation to wake up. If only you'd stop blaming and start looking inward. This is why leaving one relationship and entering another without doing the inner work simply recreates the same patterns with different faces. The unconscious doesn't give up. It will keep presenting the same lesson in new costumes until you finally learn it. Persona dissolution asks, who would you be if no one was watching? If there was no social media to perform for no colleagues to impress? No family expectations, to meet no internalized judge evaluating your worth? Who would you be? That question terrifies you because you've been the performance for so long, you don't know what remains underneath. You've been the good daughter, the capable professional, the understanding friend, the independent one, the strong one, the spiritual one. But who are you when the masks come off? The authentic self. What Jung called the self with a capital S asks what voice speaks beneath all the other voices. In the quiet moments when you're not trying to be anything, what do you know? What have you always known but been afraid to admit? That you're tired of pretending. That you don't actually want what you're pursuing. That you've been living someone else's life. That you're lonely even when surrounded by people. That you're angry. That you're sad. That you want something you can't name. This is the self trying to speak. Not the ego which speaks in should and must and what will they think. The self speaks in recognition, in rightness, in the quiet yes that resonates in your chest when something is true. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you are requires releasing who you think you should be. It demands you stop asking, how do I become good enough? And start asking, who am I beneath the trying? Here's what nobody tells you about individuation, about true psychology, for sleep, about the journey toward wholeness. It is profoundly lonely. Not because you'll be abandoned, though some people will leave unable to relate to your transformed self, but because the validation you've always sought from others cannot be found in this work. No one gives you a medal for facing your shadow. No one throws you a party for integrating your inner child. No one sees the nights you lie awake doing the hard work of becoming conscious. The world will not reward you for choosing authenticity over performance. In fact, it will often punish you. The job that requires you to smile when you want to scream the family system that needs you to stay in your role. The social circle that prefers you funny and light rather than deep and real. These will resist your transformation. Because when you change, you destabilize the whole system. People are invested in you staying who you've been. Your consistency makes them comfortable. Your predictability makes them feel secure. When you start setting boundaries, expressing needs, saying no, being honest about your limitations, you become unpredictable, uncomfortable, difficult. And they will tell you so. They will call you selfish for prioritizing your well-being. They will call you unstable for changing patterns you've maintained for years. They will suggest you're going through a phase, having a crisis need. Medication? Need to get back to your old self. But your old self was a construct, a performance, a survival strategy that once served you, but now imprisons you. And returning to it would be death, even if it looks like normalcy. So you will walk alone for a time, Not forever. You will find others who have done this work, who recognize the quiet integrity of someone living from the self. But you must walk through the loneliness first. There will be nights when you question everything, when you wonder if you were happier in ignorance, when the unconscious material surfacing feels overwhelming and you want to shove it back down. Return to distraction. Go back to sleep, in the metaphorical sense. Don't. Keep walking. The work is invisible to others, which means you must trust it without external validation. You must know for yourself that you are becoming more real, more whole, more true even when no one else sees it or values it. This is why sleep becomes the sacred practice, because night is when no one is watching. No performance required, no persona needed. Just you and the unconscious doing the slow work of integration that happens in darkness, in privacy, in the deep places where ego cannot reach. Jung spent years in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, writing the Red Book, engaging with figures from his dreams and active imagination, descending into psychological material so disturbing that he feared for his sanity. He could not explain this work to colleagues. He could barely articulate it to himself, but he trusted the process. He stayed with it. And what emerged was not breakdown, but breakthrough, a complete reconceptualization of the psyche that has helped millions of people understand their own depths. Your journey will not look like Jung's. You are not meant to create a new psychological system, but you are meant to discover your myth, your pattern, your particular way of being human. And that discovery happens not through seeking external teachers, but through befriending the inner teacher, the self, that has been guiding you all along through dreams, through synchronicities, through symptoms you've been trying to medicate rather than decode. But here is the promise. If you continue, you will no longer need what you once desperately craved. You will no longer need constant validation because you will have learned to validate yourself. Not in the shallow self-esteem sense of telling yourself you are wonderful, but in the deep sense of trusting your own experience, knowing what you know, standing in your truth, even when others question it. You will no longer need to control others' perceptions of you, because you will have stopped performing. What they think becomes interesting data rather than existential threat. Their approval or disapproval cannot touch the core of who you are, because you finally met that core and it is stable. You will no longer be controlled by unconscious patterns because you've made them conscious. The projection stops. The repetition compulsion loosens. You start choosing relationships and situations that serve your wholeness rather than unconsciously recreating childhood dynamics. You cease to be fragmented, split into good and bad light, and shadow, acceptable and shameful. You become integrated. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole. All of you allowed to exist, even the parts that aren't pretty, even the parts that don't fit the image. Life becomes simpler because you're no longer maintaining the exhausting infrastructure of false selves. Your energy returns because it's no longer bound up in repression and performance. You can rest because there's nothing left to hide, nothing to defend against no one to become. And relationships change. The people who cannot meet you in your authenticity fall away. This is painful, but necessary. In their place, you attract people who've done similar work. who can sit with you in silence without needing you to entertain, who can hold complexity without demanding you simplify, who see you clearly and love what they see because it's real. There's a particular quality to being with another individuated person. You recognize it immediately. The absence of performance, the capacity to be nothing. Together, the freedom from the need to save or be saved. Two whole people choosing to walk beside each other rather than completing each other or completing themselves through each other. Jung wrote about the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage that occurs within when anima and animus unite, when masculine and feminine energies harmonize, when conscious and unconscious achieve dynamic balance. When this happens internally, external relationships transform from desperate attempts to find completion outside yourself into joyful companionship between two already complete beings. That is what's possible. Not as fantasy, but as actual lived experience for those willing to do the work. The promise is not happiness in the shallow sense. It is peace in the deep sense. Not absence of difficulty, but presence with what is. Not control over life, but participation in it. Not knowing all the answers, but trusting the questions. And sleep finally becomes what it was always meant to be. Not escape from unbearable consciousness, but return to source descent into depths, ritual of daily death and rebirth, where the ego surrenders and the self does its work. Psychology for sleep transforms from entertainment into initiation, from distraction into devotion, from something you consume into something you become. So tonight, as you lie down, practice this name what you are releasing. Not just like stress or the day, but specifically, I release the need to be perfect. I release resentment toward person. I release fear about situation. I release the belief that I am not enough. Feel each release as a physical letting go. Your jaw unclenches, your shoulders drop, your fists unfold, your belly softens. You are setting down the burdens you were never meant to carry. Then create space for what wants to emerge. You don't need to know what it is. Simply say internally, I am listening. I am open. Whatever the unconscious wants to communicate, I am ready to receive it. This is not forced meditation, not trying to clear your mind, not attempting to achieve anything. It is receptive presence, the opposite of the doing that filled your day. Notice what arises. Perhaps a memory, perhaps an emotion without object, perhaps an image or symbol, perhaps just sensation, tightness, warmth, trembling. Let it be. Don't analyze, don't fix, don't figure out. Just witness. If tears come, let them fall. If anger rises, feel it move through you. If joy bubbles up, let it expand. If there is only emptiness, rest in the emptiness. All of it is valid. All of it is the psyche's communication. And as sleep approaches, release even the effort of listening. Trust that the unconscious will continue its work, whether you're aware of it or not. The self is rising, has been rising, will continue to rise, carrying you toward wholeness in ways your conscious mind cannot comprehend. You are not alone in this work. Everyone who has chosen consciousness over convenience walks this path. Jung walked it. Your ancestors walked it in their own languages and contexts. And something larger than human, what Jung called the collective unconscious, what others call God or spirit, or simply the mystery, supports this unfolding. Sleep is how you participate in that larger intelligence, how you allow your small self to dissolve into the greater self, how you practice death so you can practice being reborn. Let tonight be a small death, a surrender, a return, and trust that what you are becoming is already forming in the darkness, waiting for dawn to reveal it. We return now to where we began, the forest at dawn, mist clinging to the earth. But you are different now. You have walked through the territories of ego and shadow, persona and child anima, and animus synchronicity and science resistance and integration. And standing at the edge of that sleeping forest again, you understand something you couldn't have known at the beginning. This place has always been here, the sacred threshold between waking and sleeping, conscious and unconscious, the self you show and the self you are. It has waited patiently while you explored every other solution, tried every other path, exhausted every external search. Now you know. Home was never out there. It was always within, in the quiet space that opens when you finally stop. We have explored night, a sacred space, the necessary dissolution of ego's tyranny, the art of surrender that creates conditions for healing. We walked through the garden of archetypes, met the shadow that wanted only to be seen held, the inner child who waited to be loved. We recognized the dance of masculine and feminine within the neuroscience that validates what mystics always knew, the synchronicities that point toward a living universe. We confronted your resistance, named the cultural forces that taught you to fear yourself, challenged you to stop performing and start being. We warned you honestly that the path is lonely, that no one validates this work. That transformation costs everything you think you are to discover who you actually are. And we offered the promise that on the other side of this work lies not happiness, but something better, wholeness. The capacity to be yourself without apology, to rest without guilt, to live without the exhausting infrastructure of pretense. Psychology for sleep is not about falling unconscious. It is about falling conscious, descending into depths where true healing occurs, where the psyche reorganizes itself according to its own wisdom, rather than the ego's anxious demands. Jung spent his life mapping this territory, creating a language for the soul's journey toward itself. But the journey is not his, it is yours. And it does not happen through understanding concepts. It happens through living them, through choosing again and again to honor the unconscious, to listen to dreams, to sit with what arises, to trust the darkness. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine once more that sleeping forest, the mist, the silence, the threshold between night and day. You stand there now not as a stranger, but as someone coming home. You have walked this path in dreams 1,000 times. Your ancestors walked it before you. Something in you remembers. The owl gives its final call. The darkness begins to soften at the edges, and you realize you are not waiting for dawn. You are the dawn, the light that consciousness brings to the unconscious, the awareness that allows what was hidden to be seen, the gentle presence that heals through simple witnessing. You do not need to become anything more than you already are. You only need to allow all of you, shadow and light child and adult wound and wisdom, to exist without rejection, to breathe together in the same chest, to sleep in the same bed without one exiling the other. This is the whole work, and it is simple, though not easy. Allow yourself to be seen, by yourself first, then perhaps by another who has also done this work, and ultimately by the larger intelligence that holds all of this, that breathes through you, that has guided you to this moment through every synchronicity, every dream, every moment of recognition. May you find your version of that dawn-lit shore, not as destination, but as perpetual beginning. May the night become your teacher rather than your enemy. May sleep become not escape, but return. May you discover that what you sought everywhere else was always here in the quiet space between breaths in the moment. Consciousness releases control, and something deeper takes over. You are held. You are guided. You are home. Let the last image be this: the diver who searched so desperately for the pearl, who exhausted himself, diving deeper and deeper into dark water, finally stops. He releases the weights, the equipment, the striving. And as he floats upward toward the surface, the water clears. Light penetrates. And he sees it, the pearl, resting just beneath him, reflecting a light that was never external, but always radiating from within. He doesn't need to grasp it. He only needs to recognize it was never separate from him. The pearl is consciousness itself, awareness recognizing itself the self that has guided every step of this journey home. Sleep is not the end of consciousness. It is consciousness returning to its source to be renewed. And when you wake tomorrow, you will not remember all of this, but something in you will have shifted. Some knot will have loosened. Some burden will have been set down. And you will move through your day a little more yourself, a little more whole, a little more able to hear the quiet voice beneath all the noise that says, "This is who you are. This has always been who you are. Welcome home." You will notice small things. The way morning light falls differently, as if the world has tilted slightly on its axis. The way conversations feel more spacious, less urgent. The way your chest expands when you breathe, as if making room for something new. These are not dramatic transformations. There will be no lightning bolt moment when everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, there will be quiet knowing, subtle shifts, the gentle integration that happens when consciousness and unconscious begin to work together rather than against each other. You will find yourself making different choices without consciously deciding to change, setting a boundary that once seemed impossible, speaking a truth that once felt too dangerous, choosing stillness over distraction. These are signs that the self is rising, that the work you do in darkness is bearing fruit in light. And on the nights when old patterns return, when the shadow seems overwhelming again, when you forget everything you've learned, and there will be such nights, remember, this individuation is not linear. It spirals. You will revisit the same territories at deeper levels. Each return brings new understanding. There is no failure in this work, only continuing practice. The fact that you keep showing up, keep listening, keep choosing consciousness over comfort. This is the work. This is enough. Good night. And may your dreams be filled with the wisdom of the depths, the healing of the unconscious, and the peace that passes understanding. The forest holds its breath. The first light touches the water, and you, at last, are home. And yet, even now, as the first light touches the water, there is no need to hurry toward waking. The threshold invites you to linger here in this space between where psychology for sleep reveals its deepest gift, not the knowledge you've accumulated, but the forgetting that allows wisdom to settle into your bones without effort. Imagine that everything you've heard tonight is now dissolving like salt into water. The concepts, the names, the frameworks, all of it softening into something simpler. Jung himself knew this. Late in his life, he said that all the theory he'd developed was simply scaffolding temporary structure to help consciousness reach toward what language could never fully capture. Now you can release even the scaffolding. What remains when the words fade? Only presence, only breath, only the quiet knowing that you have always been enough. There is an old teaching story from the Zen tradition. A student came to the master and asked, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" This was a traditional question about the essence of spiritual teaching. The master replied, "The cypress tree in the garden." The student was confused, wanting explanation, wanting meaning. But the master simply pointed again, "The cypress tree in the garden." What the master was teaching is this: sometimes the answer is not symbolic. Sometimes the tree is just a tree. And sometimes you're not a collection of archetypes and complexes, not a project to be improved, not a puzzle to be solved. Just you breathing in the darkness, allowing the night to hold you. This is what psychology for sleep ultimately offers. Not more knowledge about yourself, but permission to stop knowing and simply be. The ego wants to understand, to categorize, to make meaning. But the self knows that sometimes the most profound truth is wordless present in the simple fact of your existence. Feel your body now, not analyzing it, not trying to relax it, just feeling it. The weight of your head against the pillow, the texture of fabric against your skin, the temperature of the air moving in and out of your lungs. This body has carried you through every experience of your life. It has held every emotion you've ever felt. It has metabolized every wound and every joy. And it knows how to sleep, how to heal, how to integrate, if you simply stop interfering. Jung once wrote in a letter to a patient who was struggling, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." What he meant was that we inherit not just genetics, but psychological patterns, unfulfilled dreams, unprocessed trauma. The work of consciousness is partly about recognizing what is yours and what was handed to you, what you chose, and what chose you before you had words to name it. But tonight, you can set down even that burden. The unlived lives, the inherited patterns, the ancestral wounds, all of it can rest. You are not responsible for healing all of human history. You are only responsible for this breath, this moment, this small act of allowing yourself to be exactly as you are. In many wisdom traditions, there is the understanding that humans exist between earth and sky, matter, and spirit, the mortal and the eternal. We are the bridge, the meeting place, the threshold where consciousness emerges from unconsciousness and returns again in endless cycles. Every night when you sleep, you enact this cosmic pattern in miniature consciousness, releasing its grip, sinking back into the undifferentiated darkness from which it emerged, trusting that dawn will come again. This trust is everything. Not faith in a doctrine or belief system, but the wordless trust that a child has falling asleep in a parent's arms, the body knowing it is held even as awareness fades. Modern culture has taught you to be vigilant, to never fully surrender, to keep some parts of yourself always on guard. But psychology for sleep asks you to practice a different way: total surrender. complete trust falling backward into darkness with the faith that you will be caught. And you will be. Not because the universe owes you safety, but because you are not separate from it. The same intelligence that grows your fingernails and heals your cuts and orchestrates the unfathomable complexity of your neural networks, that intelligence is on your side. It wants your wholeness. It has always wanted your wholeness. The conscious mind, with all its anxiety and planning, is a latecomer to this ancient process. There was a woman, a painter in her 60s, who came to understand this after a lifetime of struggle. She had spent decades trying to force her creativity, sitting at the canvas with grim determination, producing work that was technically proficient, but spiritually dead. Then she had a dream. In the dream, she was standing before an enormous canvas brush in hand, ready to paint. But before she could begin, the canvas itself began to paint colors, blooming from within it. Images appearing spontaneously, no brush needed. She woke weeping. She understood the dream immediately. All those years she had been trying to create from the ego, from will and effort. But true art comes from the self, from the unconscious depths, where images already exist, waiting only for consciousness to receive them rather than manufacture them. After that dream, her approach transformed. She would sit before the canvas in meditation, waiting, listening, allowing. And the paintings that emerged carried a numinous quality her earlier work had lacked, not because they were technically better, but because they came from a deeper source. This is true not just for art, but for life itself. You are not the author of your existence, forcing meaning onto meaningless material. You are the meeting place where meaning emerges, where the unconscious becomes conscious, where potential becomes actual. The work is not to create yourself from nothing, but to allow yourself to be revealed. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's natural capacity to hold opposites in tension, until a third thing emerges that transcends both. Not shadow or light, but wholeness. Not masculine or feminine, but the sacred marriage. Not conscious or unconscious, but integrated awareness. This function operates whether you understand it or not, working in dreams and symptoms, in synchronicities, in the slow, mysterious unfolding of a life lived with attention. As you lie here now, that function is operating. Your psyche is doing what it knows to do, sorting the day's experiences, consolidating what matters, releasing what doesn't, creating new connections, solving problems that stumped your conscious mind. You don't need to direct this process any more than you need to direct your digestion or your immune response. It happens in you, through you, as you. The Persian poet Rumi wrote, "Don't go back to sleep. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you." But tonight, we say something different. Go to sleep. The darkness has secrets to show you. Not in words or concepts, but in the wordless knowing that comes when consciousness releases its grip and allows the deeper intelligence to work. There are many rooms in your psyche. During the day, you inhabit the well-lit parlor where you receive guests, where everything is arranged for presentation. But at night, you can wander through the other rooms, the dusty library where forgotten memories sleep, the basement where shadow material is stored, the attic where childhood treasures wait to be rediscovered, the secret garden where the self tends flowers you didn't plant. Psychology for Sleep gives you permission to wander these rooms without fear, to open doors you've kept locked, to touch objects you've avoided, to meet figures you've pretended don't exist. And what you discover in these rooms is not monsters, but missing pieces of yourself, exiled aspects, waiting patiently for acknowledgement, for integration, for the homecoming that allows them to finally rest. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the fractures visible rather than hiding them. The bowl is not restored to its original state. It is transformed into something new, something that honors its history of break-in. The gold seems become the most beautiful part, proof that the object has lived, has suffered, has been tended with care. Your psyche is like this. The wounds, the breaks, the places where you shattered, these are not failures to be hidden, but gold seems to be honored. They are where light gets in, as Leonard Cohen sang. They are where depth enters a life that might otherwise remain superficial. They are your particular way of being human, your unique expression of the universal struggle toward wholeness. Tonight, as you sink toward sleep, you are not escaping your fractures. You are allowing them to be tended, to be filled with the gold of consciousness, to become integrated into the larger pattern of who you are becoming. This is slow work. It does not happen in one night, 1 month, 1 year. It is the work of a lifetime, and it continues even after therapy ends, even after the books are closed, even after the videos fade to silence. Because Psychology for Sleep is not ultimately about psychology at all. It is about the soul's journey home to itself, using whatever maps and languages help Jung's archetypes, neurosciences networks, mythologies, symbols, poetry's images. But beneath all these languages is the wordless truth that you have always known. You are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The Catholic mystic Thomas Merton wrote, "There is in all visible things an invisible fecundity, a dimmed light, a meek namelessness, a hidden wholeness." This hidden wholeness is what Jung pointed toward with all his elaborate theory. This is what the self truly is, not another concept to grasp, but the wholeness that was always present beneath the fragmentation. The unity that existed before you learned to divide yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. As sleep draws closer now, you may feel a softening around the edges of your awareness, thoughts becoming less linear, more imagistic, the boundary between inner and outer growing permeable. This is healthy, natural, the threshold state where transformation occurs. Do not resist it. This is Psychology for Sleep, doing its deepest work, not teaching you something new, but allowing you to remember what you forgot, to return to the original wholeness that predated all your learning, all your conditioning, all your adaptation, to a world that demanded you become smaller than you truly are. There is a story from the Desert Fathers, those early Christian hermits who went into the wilderness to confront their demons. A young monk asked an elder, "What must I do to be saved?" The elder replied, "You have already been saved. Now you must only remember it." This is the great forgetting and the great remembering, forgetting the wholeness we were born with, then spending a lifetime remembering it again. But the second wholeness is different from the first. The child is whole through innocence, through not yet having encountered the world's sharp edges. The individuated adult is whole through integration, through having encountered those edges and chosen to remain human anyway, to stay tender, despite the reasons for hardness to keep the heart open, despite its history of breaking. Tonight, you are neither the innocent child nor the fully individuated sage. You are somewhere on the path between, and that is exactly where you should be. The journey has no endpoint, no graduation ceremony. There is only continuing practice, continuing attention, continuing willingness to meet what arises with curiosity rather than judgment. Your breath is slowing now. You may have noticed it, or you may not have. Both are fine. The body knows what to do as consciousness gradually withdraws its investment in the external world and turns inward. The same breath that animated you through the day now becomes the bridge to sleep, to dreams, to the healing darkness that is not absence of light, but presence of a different kind of seeing. Jung often spoke of the numinous, those moments when something larger than human breaks through into ordinary consciousness, inspiring both awe and fear. The numinous appears in great art, in nature's vastness, in moments of profound synchronicity. But it also appears in the quiet threshold, between waking and sleeping, when ego's defenses are down, and the self can speak without translation, without mediation, directly to the heart. If you feel that presence now, not as something external, but as the deepest part of your own being, you are touching what Jung called the God within what Buddhism calls Buddha nature, what Quakers call the inner light. Not a religious concept to believe in, but a lived reality to experience, to rest in, to trust as you trust gravity or your own heartbeat. The Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh taught walking meditation, bringing full awareness to each step. He would say, I have arrived, I am home. Not arriving somewhere else, but recognizing that you are already where you need to be. Each step, each breath, each moment of awareness is the destination. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to achieve, no one else to become. As you lie here, you can whisper these words to yourself. If they resonate, I have arrived, I am home. Not in the sense that your journey is over, but in the sense that the journey was always bringing you here, to this body, this breath, this moment of allowing yourself to exist without apology or amendment. The house of your psyche has many rooms, and you have wandered through them tonight. The shadow's chamber, the child's nursery, the anima's garden, the animus' tower. You have met the inhabitants, heard their stories, acknowledged their needs. And now, as night deepens toward its darkest hour before dawn, all these figures settle into their places, no longer demanding attention, willing to let you rest. Because this is what integration ultimately means, not that the different parts disappear or merge into undifferentiated oneness, but that they learn to coexist peacefully, to take turns speaking, to trust that each will be heard in due time. The shadow no longer needs to sabotage because it knows it will be seen. The child no longer needs to act out because it knows it will be held. The anima and animus no longer need to be projected because they are recognized as internal companions. And you, the awareness that witnesses all of this, can finally rest. Not the small I of the ego, but the larger I of the self, the one who was there before your personality formed, who will remain after all your identifications dissolve, who is reading these words right now, with a knowing that goes deeper than intellectual comprehension. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a practice called dream yoga, where practitioners maintain awareness even while sleeping and dreaming. The goal is not to control dreams, but to recognize that both waking and dreaming are states of consciousness, neither more or less real than the other. Advanced practitioners eventually recognize waking life itself as a kind of dream, not unreal, but fluid, constructed, interpretable. You don't need to practice dream yoga tonight, but you can hold lightly the recognition that consciousness takes many forms. Waking consciousness is one, sleeping consciousness is another, and there are states between hypnagogic images as you fall asleep, hypnopompic visions as you wake the liminal spaces where unexpected insights arrive unbidden. Psychology for sleep honors all these states as valid, as meaningful, as part of the psyche's natural rhythm of expansion and contraction, light and dark, conscious and unconscious. You are not trying to eliminate the unconscious. That would be impossible and undesirable. You are learning to be in relationship with it, to hear its messages, to trust its intentions, even when they're uncomfortable. The psychologist James Hillman, who studied with Jung students, wrote extensively about what he called soul making. For Hillman, the goal of psychology is not adjustment or happiness, but depth, cultivating a rich, complex, multifaceted relationship with your own existence. Soul is not something you have, but something you make through attention, through imagination, through staying present to life's difficult beauty. Tonight is soul making. Every moment of awareness as you drift toward sleep. Every dream that will visit you. In the deep hours, every stirring of emotion, or memory, or longing. All of it weaves the fabric of your soul, making you more fully who you are. Not a fixed identity, but an ongoing process. A verb rather than a noun. A becoming rather than a being. The Japanese have a concept called ma, the space between things. Not emptiness, but pregnant pause. The silence between notes that makes music possible. The white space on a page that makes calligraphy legible. Ma is not absence, but presence of a different kind. The formless that allows form to emerge. As you drift now in the space between waking and sleeping, you are in Ma. Not nothing, not empty, but full of potential. Full of the formless, from which dreams and insights and tomorrow's consciousness will emerge. This space is sacred. This space is where transformation happens. This space is home. You may be aware now of sounds in your environment, a distant car, the house, settling your own breathing. These sounds are not disturbing you. They are part of the whole part of the symphony of existence, playing itself through this particular moment. Everything belongs. Even the thoughts that drift through claiming you should be asleep already, even they belong. No need to push anything away. Simply allow it all to be, to flow, to pass, like clouds across the vast sky of your awareness. Jung wrote that the psyche is self-regulating, always moving toward balance. When you've been too much in the light, it pulls you toward darkness. When you've been too rational, it sends irrational dreams. When you've been too alone, it creates longing for connection. This self-regulation continues whether you cooperate with it or not, but cooperation makes the process gentler, more graceful, less violent. Tonight you are cooperating. By lying here, by listening, by allowing yourself to not know, do not be anything in particular. This is cooperation. This is saying yes to the psyche's wisdom. This is trusting that something in you knows the way home even when your conscious mind is lost. And the way home is always through descent. Not climbing toward the light, but sinking into darkness, not transcending the body, but inhabiting it more fully, not escaping the world, but meeting it more intimately. This is Jung's great insight, and it runs counter to much spiritual teaching that sees enlightenment as escape from matter, from earth, from the messy incarnation of being human. For Jung, enlightenment, if we can use that word, comes through integration, not transcendence. It comes from making the unconscious conscious, from bringing light into darkness, while also honoring darkness as its own kind of knowing. It comes from being fully human, fully embodied, fully feeling fully alive to both joy and sorrow, fully present to the whole catastrophe and miracle of existence. As sleep finally takes you, let it be this full sleep. Not escape, but immersion. Not checking out, but checking in to the deepest levels of your being, where healing happens in the dark, where the self does its work, while the ego finally rests. The forest still holds its breath. The first light still touches the water, and you still and always are home. Let the last words be the simplest. Thank you for this night. Thank you for this breath. Thank you for choosing awareness, for honoring your depths, for trusting that psychology for sleep can be both rest and transformation, both ending and beginning, both death and birth. Sleep now. The soul knows what to do. And when you wake hours from now in light that will feel both familiar and new, you will not remember all of this, but you will carry it in your body, in your dreams, in the quiet knowing that something has shifted. Some door has opened. Some homecoming has occurred in the night's deep shelter. Rest well, traveler. The journey continues tomorrow. But for now, for these precious hours of darkness, you are released from all becoming. You are simply here, simply breathing, simply home. Good night,